Welcome to today's lesson on thinking sociologically, how to activate your own sociological imagination. I'm Professor Catherine Lyon in the Sociology Department. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to do at least 3 things. The first is to describe the sociological imagination and to actually use this imagination to interpret what's happening around you. This would be maybe your own experiences, events happening locally and globally, and other social issues. You'll also be able to explain how individual people's biographies intersect with the history of the societies they are living in. And I'll finish by asking you how you ended up in university today. We'll connect your personal experience of going to university to the broader social forces shaping access to post-secondary education. Let's start with our first section on thinking sociologically. I've chosen to show here people waiting for the subway underground. For sociologists and people who think sociologically, even mundane moments like this that seem really regular can be a starting point for asking broader questions about how societies are organized and how humans act in those societies. So let's check in for a minute. What actually is sociology? Before we look at this definition, let's look at this ad together. What do you think this ad is selling? It states feeling sad and depressed. Are you anxious, worried about the future, feeling isolated and alone? What are your top 2 guesses for what the bottom half of this ad looks like? When I first saw this, I certainly was not expecting it to say, you might be suffering from capitalism. And in the small print below, it even says, symptoms may include homelessness, unemployment, poverty, hunger, feelings of powerlessness, fear, apathy, boredom, cultural decay, loss of identity, extreme self-consciousness, loss of free speech, incarceration, revolutionary thoughts, or death. That was my best speedy infomercial voice. You might find this poster surprising, striking, humorous, or something else. For me, it's making a point that's rooted in fundamentally sociological thought. I would expect this ad to be selling me an individual level remedy or solution. Perhaps a medical or clinical treatment, a meeting with a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or a diagnosis and medical intervention. And while these are, of course, valid and important ways of addressing things like anxiety and depression, which are real issues, individual level solutions are not always the whole story. They likely don't address the root cause for all people. So let's turn to our definition of sociology. We define sociology as the systematic study of human society. So you'll notice here that the unit of analysis, our focus, is not individual people, but society or other large social groups. And the study of human society is systematic because it follows a scientific method, uses transparent procedures that can be assessed by other scholars, and builds on previous research. One of the reasons why the previous example is sociological in nature is because sociologists tend to look outside of individuals instead of within individuals. So how might this apply to something like depression? While medical and biological factors are absolutely at play here, sociologists ask how these factors interact with broader social forces. So, for example, how do economic factors shape a person's likelihood of experiencing depression? And we can see that rates of depression differ between countries. We might also ask how rates of depression differ based on socioeconomic status within a country, as well as by gender, sexual orientation, and so on. Sociologists would also consider cultural factors like the way depression is framed and discussed in particular societies. Some countries and communities have named and destigmatized various mental health experiences and needs, making discussing mental health more accessible for members of the population. I encourage you now to write down in your own words an explanation of what sociology is and what sociologists do. Now that you have your own working definition of sociology, my goal today is to build on this to help you gain a broader and deeper understanding of what sociology is, what sociologists do, and why it matters. And to do this, we are going to turn to a key concept within the discipline, the sociological imagination. I'm giving you here a definition of this imagination, but I'm much less interested in your ability to restate this definition and much more interested in your ability to apply this imagination to interpret real events and problems. In 1959, U.S. sociologist C. Wright Mills, which stands for Charles Wright Mills, wrote the book The Sociological Imagination. This idea is so significant to Mills that that is the title of the book itself. Very simply put, the sociological imagination is the ability we can each tap into to see the relationship between individual experiences and the larger society. Mills was a professor of sociology at Columbia University from 1946 to 1962 when he passed away. He published the sociological imagination toward the end of his career, and it has since then become one of the most widely read sociology books, but this was not the case at first. At first, it was heavily criticized because Mills himself was critiquing the social sciences. He argued that sociology and the social sciences more broadly needed to be more relevant for helping everyday people understand how their lives are put together. Mills also was a more critical sociologist in that he didn't see himself just as a neutral observer of society, but implicated in making meaningful change, which is one particular orientation to research. Today we are discussing chapter 1 from his book. Mills called this chapter The Promise. Why do you think he named it this? I'll give you a hint. On the cover of his book, you can find a puzzle with one missing piece. Mills is promising us the ability to complete the puzzle, to add the missing context and perspective for understanding our lives better within the context of what is happening in the larger society. Let's look at how Mills makes his case. He wrote, quote, "Nowadays, people often feel that their private lives are a series of traps. They sense that within their everyday worlds, they cannot overcome their troubles. Yet, people do not usually define their troubles they endure in terms of historical change and institutional contradiction." What does Mills mean by this? We see here that Mills is talking about people facing challenges, and they're experiencing these challenges as private and maybe unique to themselves, and they feel trapped. They cannot overcome the challenges that they face. And yet Mills is pointing to the fact that many of the challenges and successes that we encounter are not just private and personal and unique to us. They are tied to what has been happening historically leading up to that moment and how institutions around us are changing. This would be institutions, for example, like the family or the education system. We are surrounded by and often embedded in institutions in much of our life. Let's look at an example to tease out what Mills is saying. He uses the example of unemployment. He writes, "Consider unemployment when in a city of 100,000, only one person is unemployed. That is his or her personal trouble. And for its relief, we properly look at the character of the person, his or her skills, and his or her immediate opportunities. But when in a nation of 50 million employees, 15 million people are unemployed, that is an issue. And we may not hope to find its solution within the range of opportunities open to any one individual." So what words are jumping out for you from this paragraph? I notice Mills making this distinction between a personal trouble on the one hand and a public issue on the other hand. So let's brainstorm. What could be some personal reasons why a person would be unemployed, making it a unique personal trouble specific to them, and making the solution to the problem within their own control, versus some broader social, economic, and political shifts that could be affecting unemployment on a mass scale. When people are faced with these broader public issues, they often cannot fully resolve the root cause of the problems they face. I've quickly listed here just a few reasons why someone might be facing unemployment. Pick two, one that you think is more of a private trouble and one that you think is more of a public issue. Keep in mind there's often some overlap. For each of the reasons that you picked, note down what it is about that reason that makes it more private or more public. I encourage you to pause the recording and to take some notes. When you're ready, press play. Let's start by looking at the example of discrimination. This is very much a public issue because it is rooted in the structure and history of the society. Depending on the society, certain groups will be more likely to experience discrimination in hiring and promotion practices than others. At the same time, many people would put poor attitude as a private trouble, something that we as individuals have control over. But we could also ask what makes a good attitude for a worker. And this is very much shaped by the expectations of the company and the employer and the time period. For example, if you think about working in the service industry, in North America, when you walk into somewhere like McDonald's, you expect to receive a warm greeting from the cashier. At one point, McDonald's used the slogan that smiles are free, with the expectation that service comes with a smile. But did you know that when McDonald's tried to expand into Russia, they faced challenges with their customer service model because it was quite unusual at the time for Russian customer service to involve what was seen as this artificial and forced friendliness. So what counts as a good and bad attitude can also be shaped by social context. Here we see that private troubles and public issues are not binary categories, but more along a spectrum. And this is why Mills writes that we need to employ our sociological imagination in interpreting the challenges and successes that we face. He writes, the very structure of the problem, here unemployment, and the range of possible solutions requires us to consider the economic and political institutions of the society, and not merely the personal situation and character of a scatter of individuals. If you have a goal, if you face a challenge, if you encounter a new experience, you're going to be much better prepared to tackle it if you understand how it is structured at a societal level. The job that you are planning on getting after graduation, is that still going to exist in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? You can get a better sense of this not just by studying hard today in your chosen field, but by thinking about how the economy is changing, what new industries are popping up, what new technology is being researched. You will be in a superior position to make these personal decisions if you take this broader societal lens. And another example, if you are being treated in a certain way, either very positive or very negative, the sociological imagination encourages us not to internalize this as purely personal treatment. If you have a negative experience, it may be something completely unrelated to who you are as a person and entirely related to how a society values certain characteristics or certain physical markers of status. And if you are being treated very well, being given access to lots of opportunities, the same principles apply. The sociological imagination offers us access to the tools to understand why this differential treatment exists in the first place, and to see it at least partially rooted in its public structural causes. By accurately and systematically, with data-driven evidence, identifying the root cause of, for example, differential treatment across social groups, you are then much better equipped to work to change those root causes. And this is an important point to take away that we'll talk about later this lesson. Mills argues that we as individuals are shaped by society, the time and place that we are born and grow up, but at the same time, we as individuals can recreate and reshape that society.